Well, welcome back to the Clinical Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Earl, and I am honored and very humbled to have a wonderful individual, but also a world-class researcher, Dr. Stuart McGill. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Alex. Nice to meet you. I believe we've met in the past, but you're in my mind now.
Yeah, our paths have crossed. I was a Cairo student, and I heard you first speak in Las Vegas well over a decade ago at one of the chiropractic rehabilitation conventions. And yeah, it was different to hear someone speak about low back and rehab coming out of undergrad and then into chiropractic school. And I thought, who is this guy? And of course, people were talking about your books. And so the very next thing I did after the convention was just buy all your books, read them through and through, and very cool stuff, very interesting stuff. And now I would say you're probably in the rehab side of the chiropractic profession. You're one of the go-to references for what we do every day in clinical practice. So yeah, you've been instrumental in a lot of people's clinical career. And so first of all, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done. You've helped clarify a lot of things for people, and like I said, you've challenged a lot of people, myself included. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where our paths first crossed. But yeah, we got a couple of questions to get us started here today. Um, you've been on a lot of podcasts. You've made some appearances, and I just can't help but notice that you've had, you know, I mean, well, there's just a lot of information that's gone out there, and we want to target clinicians who want to refine their clinical approach in practice. And so, over the decades, how has your own understanding of low back pain changed the most? Is kind of where I'd like to start.
Yeah, from a evolutionary point of view into what I am now, I guess. Well, I took a path quite different from most of your colleagues, and that was I started out as a scientist. And I only had one question in the beginning, and it was simple. How does the spine work? And it was following through that path that different clinical groups would ask me to come and speak. And then someone in the audience would say, well, that's an interesting perspective. We have a difficult patient that we think might fall into that category. Would you come and see the patient? And I said, well, no, I'm not a clinician. And they said, well, don't worry, we'll be with you, but come and then I realized as a scientist and someone with engineering training, I approached the whole situation as a troubleshooting exercise, an engineering troubleshooting exercise. It wasn't the typical, oh, this is what you do for a set medical exam. And if something wasn't making sense, we followed it up and we looked for an alternate hypothesis, and then we would test another way. So that was something that has always been with me, and I don't know if that's changed over the decades, but it's certainly been defining. But your question is over the decades. I would have to say that, as you know, I don't believe in non-specific low back pain. I think it's all very specific. Uh, However, to make it specific, it requires a thorough assessment. And then people are not non-specific, they're very specific and they fit different subcategories. And if you really get down to it, every single patient is a subject and category of one. So I think I've gotten better at that over the decades, uh, getting down to a subject N of one and doing follow-up in our experimental research in the clinic at the university. When I started that, our promise to ourselves and our clients was that we are going to perform follow-up with every single patient we ever saw in the history of the clinic. So we know exactly our success and failure rate. We know what subcategory the person fit in. We know what they were given to do. We know if they complied or not. So that process allowed me to be a much better diagnostician, I would say. So that's certainly changed over decades. I don't know if you want to talk about scientific development, but certainly doing our own science from the many perspectives that we approached it with, together with the great breakthroughs of others, it allowed me to be more confident when speaking to back pain clients. For example, we knew and have known for a couple of decades that a lot of disc bulges start off with end plate fracture, and that allows delamination of the collagen fibers in the annulus to happen with less mechanical insult. It speeds up the process. Well, different groups. I can think of some of the most recent work of Rajesh Karan's group from India. They just won the latest Issels Prize, International Society for Study of the Lumbar Spine, the top prize for 2025, the most recent one, showing that when a surgeon harvests the nucleus that has been extruded in a disc bulge surgery, almost all the time there's evidence of end plate fracture. There's little bits of broken cartilage and bone, etc., that's been pulled through the open fissure, and that was harvested, proving that the disc herniation process started with end plate damage, an excess that they might have slipped and fall and landed on their pelvis, or it was an excessive deadlift or squat training in a gym, or it was something compressive. And then repeated loaded flexion really accelerated the process. So uh, what the Chinese Peng Fei's group has recently shown that the more the broken bits of bone and debris in the harvested nucleus, the less likely the bulge will resolve on its own. But if it's simply a delamination process and the herniated material is simply nucleus, the chance of instantaneous resolution is much, much greater. So it's these things that when I see the client, I can do a little decompression perhaps and see if we can vacuum in and change the shape of the disc bulge within a matter of 5 minutes. Looking at the MRI and the extent of modic change and all these sorts of things gives me much more confidence in my advice to them. There's a very good chance this is going to resolve on its own if you stop the original offense. Or no, we're going to have to work at this a little bit, and you're going to have to be a bit more vigilant and expect more time. So my confidence has improved over my career that way. And would you like another one?
Absolutely. Keep going.
Yeah. When I started as a PhD student, my PhD research was to create the most anatomically and biofidelic computer model of the spine, uh, representing the disc in great detail, full disc mechanics, elastic mechanics, the ligaments, the muscles, the pressurized viscera and gut, etc. But I didn't have fascia in that model, and I didn't appreciate its importance and its role. And that's really changed, I would say,
Hmm.
over the years. The fascia, I no longer consider the spine as a group of muscles with agonists and antagonists, because once they're all wrapped in fascia, they form composites. And once you reassess the system as a system of composites, no muscle is an antagonist. Every muscle turns into a agonist in some way in the mechanical process. So that's quite revolutionary. It has impact on we discussed who your audience was, and I know you have some strength coaches. There are too many strength coaches that train athletes as strength athletes using powerlifting exercises, etc., not realizing that most athletes who play sports and games, football, baseball, basketball, golf, they are elastic, pulsing athletes. And when you measure the greats in their sport, they're rarely the strongest. They are the ones with the greatest elastic tuning in their body with the technique to load, store elastic energy and recover it, boom, to explode. That's a strength athlete. Bam. That is a elastic strength speed athlete. Totally different.
Hmm.
So, how do you throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball? How do you hit a perfect, precise golf swing, swing after swing? It isn't through strength. And that was revolutionary, I suppose. Another real development in my career and realizing how to apply all that to enhance both resilience and performance in the majority of athletes. Uh, I don't know if you're seeing this clinically, but certainly the number of young golfers coming from the American training culture right now who have very ruined careers because of an overemphasis on strength and hitting the ball far too many cycles per day. Oh, I'm going to go and hit the ball as hard as I can 20 times today. Well, that's why you have crossed the tipping point into a very catabolic state, and the cumulative micro trauma now has made you that you can't swing a club at all. And this, it's just tragic what's going on right now at a broad level. I can tell you the great golfers of years ago didn't train that way. And, I'm talking of the Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus types who had wonderful careers. Anyway, I got a little bit off topic there, but certainly fascia, understanding the processes of very specific pain pathways like disc bulges is one I spoke about, and becoming a better diagnostician. So that's,
Can I ask you just a small segue question based off of what you just said there about fascia and soft tissue? So a lot of manual therapists would say, um, you know, well, there's a lot of different narratives around soft tissue, but how would you communicate? First of all, do you advocate for fascial work or for soft tissue work in the presence of like a disc injury where there would, be some would argue that there's a need for soft tissue work, and your appreciation for fascia over the years. How would you either what's the narrative around soft tissue work? Do you support it, or is it something where if it's mechanical in nature, then the soft tissue has a role, but maybe it's, patient specific. I'm just curious because I'm looking to improve as well. Like you said, this is for clinicians who are just trying to improve their own clinical reasoning and, when to do soft tissue on someone with a back injury. Because there's probably an overemphasis as well with soft tissue. And so there's just a fine line there. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on when it's appropriate to really go after some fascia with soft tissue work.
well, if you know my MO, so to speak, I'm going to say, well, it depends. And that
Yeah.
annoys some people. They think it's the professor trying to avoid the issue, but it isn't at all. It's the most truthful answer.
Hmm.
Uh, and now that I can qualify that a little bit, we will, we specialize now. And at this stage of my career, I'm retired from the university and we have this clinic, BackFitPro. We get a lot of requests from some very, very top flight athletes from around the world. Sometimes, well, just to back up, my first role is to desensitize their pain and get some base pain-free movement back once again. We have to uncorrupt, so to speak, all of the systems that have been so impacted with the pain. And it's not only the mechanical system, their neurological system, their endocrine system, even their cardiovascular system has been corrupted by pain. So the first order of business is to remove the cause of pain, allow them to desensitize and get some base movement patterning going. Now, at that point, I have a decision to make. Usually, these athletes come with their medical team and their coaches and whatnot. And as a team, we work it through and I give them my opinions. Once I've done my primary to get them moving well and out of pain, and we've built some base resilience and some base capacity, we decide, do I need an expert in that sport to carry it through now? Or can we do it? And it might go either way. But now I can answer your question with that background about soft tissue work. Let's say I've got a 20-year PGA veteran, a really good golfer. They've made multiple millions of dollars. They're fully incentivized, etc. Uh, I am probably not going to get them back onto the tour alone. I will need someone who's an expert in tuning their body now for I might adjust their style of swing, mind you, to be less biomechanically taxing on their known pathology that is frankly going to take years to get full capacity back, if ever, but they can still win on the tour. So the tuning of their body is very precise, where to add a little bit of stiffness. We do that through muscle coactivation patterns and that kind of thing. And where to create a little bit more mobility. We're dealing with a linkage. And if we get that backwards, in other words, we mobilize things that need to be more stiff and we stiffen things that need to be more mobile, we will fail. And that is a real art and a science, and it's very person specific. You think of the pulse that goes through the body of a great golfer at ball impact. You take someone like Bubba Watson, who leaps into the air at that instant in time to create that instant pulse of stiffness as impact occurs. You get someone who's an external rotator pulse. They need big spikes on their shoes. They're ripping the uppers off the lowers of their shoe, but that's much harder on the knees. So you'll see why some people will get knee problems. And anyway, the tuning of that mobility, stability as it works through the linkage is an art and a science. So I will bring in a golf expert. I mean, I can name a few if you like. For example, I work with Ben Shear quite often. So Ben will he's well known on the PGA Tour as a strength and conditioning coach, but he's the guy who organizes this very strategic stability, mobility rubric, shall we say. And he'll bring them here, and I'll do my job, which we don't fail very often. Occasionally we do, but to get them back to base pain-free operations. And then he gets them back and he tunes them now to really perform with resilience. Yes, there will be strategic soft tissue work. Now, is it just rolfing all over their body? Absolutely not. The great soft tissue artists know exactly what to leave alone, and they know
Mm.
exactly what the targets are, and they know how much and how often, etc. Not only are we tuning stiffness through soft tissue work, but we're tuning neurology as well. And as you know, you can immediately change pain just through certain soft tissue techniques that are operating on some neurological loops that have been perturbed with pain or not. Anyway, that would be I know it's not a yes or no, which is what a lot of young people want. It doesn't work that way. So,
I found myself answering similar questions. I've been a chiropractor now for 10 years, almost 11. And in the beginning, I was so confident,
yeah.
um, so sure, so certain that I knew the answer because I'd read about it in, your book and I'd read about it in other things and I felt well educated and well informed. And it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more I know, the more I learn, the longer I'm in practice, uh, the less confidence I actually have in saying things for certain. So then now I say things, well, you're right, it does depend and who's in front of me. That's usually if somebody asks me a question about do I believe in X or Y? My first response is almost always, who's in front of me? Who am I dealing with? Who am I working with? What baggage, if you'd like, what background do they come with? And then where are they trying to go? And then you kind of curate this treatment or these strategies, to them, which makes it fun, in my opinion. It makes clinical practice fun. Because otherwise, if I'm doing the same thing to every patient that comes in, I think I'd get bored after a year or so, maybe even a month. I don't know. But it makes it fulfilling. It makes the work that we do with the end of one patient in front of us very meaningful, in my opinion. So, anyways, no, thanks for sharing that. I think if I may, I'll
May I
share.
riff on your answer there for just a moment?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Since we
Yeah.
recognize your audience as clinicians and hopefully some young ones.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for me to get an email message from a student who's currently, but in the later parts of their program in Cairo or in physio or something like that. And the gist of their message is, I've been learning. This is what you do for back pain. This is what you do for knee, whatever. And it's a cookie cutter approach. And they say, I can't live with this because I know in my heart that this isn't going to help very many people. And I'm just going to be running a mill of one person after another doing exactly the same thing that I've been trained to do and that I can have a billing code for. And that's going to bore the hell out of me. I'm considering a career change. And my response is, well, I hope you don't consider a career change. That's exactly a nice place to be. Finish off your training, but realize that it's not a cookie cutter approach. And it's a wonderful life when every person that walks in through your door is an engineering troubleshooting puzzle to solve. And you're the one who can change their life. And while I'm on this little soapbox, I'm going to say one more thing. Think of the health, the lifelong health, and a popular word these days is health span. Think of the health span of every single one of us. And what is the most important determinant of that health span that you have power over? I mean, you can't change your genetics, of course, but and in every single discussion, it is stress. The cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, the psychological system, of course, the MSK system, all require stress to be resilient and perform well. So if it's under stressed and stress comes from force and it ends up with strain, and strain is the variable that kicks off the adaptation, but stress is the one in the middle of that differential mathematical process. But nonetheless, every single system requires optimal stress, not too much and not too little for optimal health. Now, who has the greatest influence over a person's exposure to stress? It's the one who organizes their exercise broadly. Should they weight train, run, mobilize, whatever. It's not the family doc. It's not the surgeon. These are all people who come in after that process has been compromised and failed.
Mm.
So, having said that, I can finish off with my little advice to the younger clinicians. It's a tremendous responsibility to realize that you are the ones who have the greatest impact on that person's health span. Um, be good at it, enjoy it, figure it out, keep working to understand the science, keep figuring out how to read a person, look in their eyes. Can you see their pain? Can you see their clinical depression? There's the posture of clinical depression. Go read a clinical psychology book, and you've got to see this and keep honing your skills on reading people and hacking your way through the full spectrum to optimize their health. So when I put it that way, they say, wow, okay, this is just part of my journey. Here's where I am now in my educational career, but now it's really just starting. So that's my answer, and that's
No,
helps
I
a
think
lot
it's
of younger clinicians.
yeah, I think it's really good advice. I think if I were putting myself in someone who's a student or a new graduate, let's say less than 5 years in practice, I think it'd be super helpful information to hear. Um, yeah. I think you brought up the word health span, which is really popular these days. Um, Another segue question that I would have for you is longevity is another word that's out there, and we got people that are creating longevity clinics. Um, and you've also mentioned things like previous end plate disruption and fracture. So how do you navigate those two? I hate to use the word worlds, but someone who's trying to live a higher quality life for longer, but they might come to that conclusion after living a life that has had previous musculoskeletal aches and pains. Because in one sense, people are kind of talking in a way that you can achieve more, you can increase your capacity later on. But when it comes to the spine, is that a realistic or attainable feat if they've had, years and years of back pain with, for example, deadlifting you've mentioned. So I guess my question would be is, are you an advocate for people pursuing longevity or increasing their health span? And if so, what from the back perspective, what do we need to keep an eye out for? It's kind of a two-part question.
I think of people who have chosen to smoke their whole life. And I believe some don't quit because they like it. They love it. It's what is it defines them. It gives them great pleasure, and they will compromise their health span for the enjoyment that smoking gives them. It wouldn't be my choice. However, I will tell you, I've been on this planet almost 70 years. I have some passions in my life that aren't good for my health span. I love hot, high-powered snowmobiles. 2 years ago, I fractured my spine hitting a rock at 100 miles an hour. I I know this. That's my smoking. Will it? I mean, it's had a little bit of a detrimental effect on my spine because at T9, there's a kink that goes like this now. It's not a good thing to have. And you realize who you're talking to, still just a stupid man with a big Y chromosome that continues. So do you see how when we get right down to the fundamentals, it's this balance between living life and squeezing the hell out of it or conserving every little aspect. And I think some people are miserable in their over management of trying to live to 100, you know. So that might surprise you, that answer. I mean, this is life when you're young. You get out there and you squeeze life, and I'll often use that when I'm dealing with athletes who are in a little bit of a funk. And every time I see them, I'll have a little saying with them, and I say, "Well, what do you know today?" And they know what the answer is. And there's this one athlete. She's world dominant in her sport in the world, and and the answer, our little game is, she says, "I'm grabbing life by the balls and I'm gonna squeeze." So I say, "What do you know today?" And that's it. And then we get on with our work. So, does that answer surprise you a little bit? But having said that, of course, we're going to use best practice and good science to not be too stupid and uh, see if we can give them a better life right now, given all the damage that they've accumulated. And but by the way, every person that comes here, they've already been to a dozen different clinicians. No one gets back pain and says, "Oh, we're going to go off and see McGill." It doesn't work that way. They've tried everyone else, and we're the last straw. They say, "Well, they say, I've tried everything. apparently the last thing I have right now is surgery. And I'll say, well, what's the surgical target? And they don't know, or it might be so, they've got three things. And I say, well, surgery's not going to work out very well when you've got three, potent pain mechanisms. But anyway, I should really get back on focus with the answer. Um, so do you see it depends and it's a balance. You've got to squeeze life. We've only got one of them that we, on the other hand, yes, we are. And that changes. And another thought popped into my old brain here, Alex. That really changes. How I train now is not what I did when I was 20s and 30s. It was strength training back then, putting on some massive muscle and, some vanity stuff and ego stuff. What were my numbers and those sorts of things mattered. Now, I strength train here. Well, just at back, I got all the stuff, so I can strength train 2 days a week. I mobility train 2 days a week, and I do cardiovascular training 2 days a week. And one day a week, I make damn sure I do nothing so that the aches and pains don't creep up on me, and I've got a day of adaptation there. And I live a very physical life, so if I'm doing a physical activity that day, like outside splitting my firewood, I've checked the boxes on all three. So, but that regiment wouldn't work when I was 30. Anyway, I don't know. It was a probably an unfocused answer.
No, I think it's a fair answer because it's takes into account, the stage of life that you're in, but also it takes into account, um, you know, what people are searching for. Um, it really it matters, but also I like what you said about just living life as well, because we can't be so rigid, in my opinion, we can't be so rigid that we miss life that's taking place right in front of our eyes. And that's what I hear you say, and I believe that too. And so yeah, go enjoy yourself, but smoking's not for me either, by the way. But I think that some people view this as like every single decision I make is going to get me closer to living to 100, and that centurion, label that people, talk about within the longevity confines. Okay, that's getting a lot of people to make wiser or maybe healthier decisions, but I do think that we're only given this one chance with this one body, with this one life, and I want to live. When I'm done, I want to say that I lived it, to the fullest, right? I didn't do the bare minimum, but I lived it to the fullest, and that's why I'm an entrepreneur. That's why I've got a full family because I want to
Well, I was
do,
going to say, Alex, you have to be the dad to your six
mm,
as good as your dad was to you.
yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow, that's a statement. That's a statement. And a challenge, but I think I've been blessed with incredible parents, and I don't know if you've heard this before, but it was my parents raised me. Okay, they raised me, and now they are spoiling their grandchildren. We'll put it that way. They didn't spoil me, and so I think you've heard it before, but it's raise your kids, spoil your grandkids. If you spoil your kids, you end up raising your grandkids. And so my parents are absolutely loving the phase of life that they're in by spoiling their grandchildren. And they have 10 of them. Well, our sixth is due in May, but they will have 10 soon. And yeah, I really look up to my dad, especially as I mentioned before we press record here, that it's a sweet season that he's in. He's the one I want to call when I'm going through something tough, but he's also the one I want to call when I celebrate things. He's one of the first people I said when I booked you for today's one of the first people I told that I was excited to interview you and honored to interview you as well. So, but yeah, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. And he's also a beneficiary of your work and really just in the topic of getting people more active and getting people strength and working on all areas. And so he would come into our clinic in Illinois for once or twice a week, and he's benefiting. He's maybe a little bit older than you at the moment, but he's also the type of person that wants to be around to celebrate his grandchildren. And so he's made lifestyle choice, changes, and he's benefiting from it. And he's made it fun. He's an accountant, so he looks at numbers and stuff, but he's made a game out of it. And he has built momentum within his own fitness journey. And I mean, the other day he was telling me that he did 50 push-ups. He's done a 2-minute front plank, and he's 71 years old. And I'm like, this guy's my hero. Like that's pretty cool. I know people in their 20s and 30s that can't go 30 seconds without, needing a break from a front plank. Or even I have reached about the 1 minute mark, and I start shaking, and I'm like, where's this coming from? I used to be able to crank these out, no problem. So, anyways, that's a little bit off the beaten path for me. But thank you for listening, and thank you for asking. Back to back to kind of just biomechanics, if that's okay for a moment. Um, how we apply biomechanics in clinical practice, and then how these can be misapplied is what I wanted to ask you next, which would be many clinicians say they apply biomechanics, but what do you see as a common misapplication of biomechanical principles in the modern rehabilitative setting?
It depends on the clinician in the case.
Sure.
Um, so I'm going to go to yesterday. That's the most recent that's in my mind. And I was asked to consult on a case where the client would make progress under the um, guidance of this clinician, and then he would blow up. Pain would be back, and he'd have another acute episode. And that story had been going on for the last 2 years. They just can't get this guy through to a resilient state. They get him so far. And then I said, okay, well, tell me what's going on. And I did a little bit of an online assessment, and I got them to show me their programming. And in the assessment, I asked them to do a prone instability test. And of course, it was positive. As I suspected from the description of the symptoms, I said to him, do you roll over in bed and ever get a sharp pain? He says, yeah, I do. And I said, when you put a weight down, do you sometimes get a little man who puts a little knife in your back, reminding you that you just had a movement catch? So all of these are heavy indicators of joint instability. And so then I looked at the programming, and there was a pattern of the acute episode occurring when they introduced a cantilever over a 3-point bend exercise. So here's some biomechanics that the clinician just had no awareness of. If I stand and do a bent over row, so I take a barbell and I'm doing a bent over row, I've just created a cantilever in my spine. In other words, the mass of my upper body, gravity is acting down. It's trying to shear forwards. So there's a shear going through my spine. But the prone shear instability test just showed that was the poison that person can't handle. If we did a TRX row, so the person stands, leans back, and pulls on the TRX like this, there's no shear. We've transformed that cantilever into a 3-point bend. So a bridge is a typical structure under a 3-point bend. One end of the bridge is held up, the other end of the bridge is held up, and the third point is the traffic in the middle going down. It's creating a bending force through the bridge, but there's no shear. So as long as I can stay with 3-point bend exercises, they're highly tolerable by a shear intolerant client. So they would follow the McGill Big Three, which were all designed to be 3-point bends. Then we would do a push-up as a 3-point bend. The hands push down, the feet are pushing down, but really the earth, the floor is pushing them up, and then their body weight is pushing them down. It's a 3-point bend. There's no shear. Beautiful. But then they would say, okay, well, then we got him to pull a cable overhead and do this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what are you thinking? All of that is now shearing directly into his spine. That's why he's blowing up at that point. You just replicated his pain trigger. So, but they were clueless. They had no idea of the consequence of using footwork to position the body, direct the thrust lines through the spine rather than off center, creating twisting moments. Uh, yeah, they just had no concept of compression, shear, tension, allowing the assessment to show what is tolerable and what isn't, together with creating strategic stability and mobility and knowing how to stabilize to buttress the applied loads that are offensive and mitigate them. So once we go through all of that, uh, so that was yesterday. I've already mentioned this concept of elasticity and in tuning an athlete to build resilient performance with their back. Uh, it's all of what I've just said, footwork, directing thrust lines. But then when we get down to performance and a pulsing athlete, I mean, I'm one of the few guys who've measured cohorts of elite athletes. I took 6 or 7 top UFC fighters. I think 5 of them fought for the weight division championship at some point in their career. These guys are no slouches. In fact, I've got one coming here in 2 weeks who's had a fabulous career in the UFC and many consider one of the all-time greats. And throughout his career, how he trained speed of muscle contraction and relaxation. So the guys who hit the hardest, and I've measured them, when you think about it, there's a little bit of a pulse to get the arm going behind footwork where the thrust lines have already been created. They turn the hips, bam. And that initial pulse then has to go into a relaxation phase because when a muscle contracts, it creates force and stiffness. So the guys with the great big muscles and whatnot, I've measured them. They don't hit that hard. Look out for the ones who don't look like they're very much. And then they pulse, relax as the closing velocity increases. And then at the instant that they hit you, just a few milliseconds before they turn their body to granite, boom. And then that's what goes through you. So it was the epitome of what Bruce Lee used to call the 1-inch punch. But then they add the value of all the velocity, but that they're hitting you not with the weight of their fist. That's what the strong guys do. The guys who use this pulse, it's called bang bang neurology technique. They turn to granite when they hit you. And you know, I, I'm thinking of GSP with that jab that he had. It was ungodly. Matt Brown, when he kicked you with that leg, it's like a full swing baseball bat. I mean, I know I've been there. It's just so awesome and so incredible. So my point is you have to train speed of muscle activation, but also muscle relaxation. And when I measured those top UFC fighters, they were able to relax their muscles 6 times faster than the average graduate student walking around campus.
Hmm.
6 times faster. Matveev, the great Russian sports scientist, when he was measuring the great Russians, you think back to the days of Vasily Alexiev, the super heavyweight, Dave Riegert, uh, these were just world dominant athletes. They too think of ripping a bar off the ground and then getting underneath it quickly to catch the bar in a snatch move. You have to relax completely. Well, how nuts can you be with a couple 100 kilos? You've pulled it, now you have to relax to snap under it to catch. But they relax 6 times faster when Leonid Matveev measured them than the average Muscovite Russian. So the average strength coach and the average clinician, I don't think is aware of these biomechanical principles. And yet these are the determinants of elite performance. Maybe they don't work with world-class athletes, but everyone wants to be better than they currently are. So these are some of the things that we put into play to enhance performance. Certainly, rate of contraction relaxation is performance. And understanding a cantilever versus a three-point bend is critical for a patient who is having struggles to tie their shoe or to pick up their child. Think of your dad picking up your new one that's on the way. Um, you know, get it right, and he's got that resilience and enjoyment. So anyway, these are some of the things, and we too many people adopt powerlifting as a clinical tool. Um, I know some pretty elite powerlifters who say, why do people do this stuff if they're not on the powerlifting platform? You know, we sled drag, you can see behind me a belt squat machine. We do, piston squats on a belt squat machine. You want to set the world record in squats like Brian Carroll did? Good. Use that. You'll build a lot more capacity, and you'll be able to train with much higher volume than if you had 1,300 pounds on your back, because it is so taxing to your body, the time off that you have to take from that heavy loading through the spine. But you can train every day piston squats. You see what I mean?
Mm.
So these are all biomechanical, but there's so much more. They're neurological, they're anatomical, they're psychological, they're, you know, uh, anyway, does that, those are some three biomechanical things that come into my brain when you ask that question.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment of the clinical setting, especially your reference to different forces and compressile forces. I had a chiropractic student actually who came to see me in my office in Illinois, was just down the road from National University where I went to school, um, and it's probably 10
I've
minutes.
lectured there quite a number
Yeah,
of
yeah,
times. I
yeah.
know
So
that.
so
Yeah.
my office, and I grew up in Wheaton, just down the road from there as well. Again, before I moved to Chattanooga back in 2021, but I had a student that came to me with back problems, and I do more rehab, and I do all this stuff that we're talking about, trying to improve every single time. And this student came in, and he had already been to the student clinic as well there, and then he had been to a chiropractor that was heavy on adjusting, almost exclusively just adjusting, and then he went to a PT for exercise, and then he found me. So I joke that I get a lot of people's incomplete rehab. I took that phrase from a colleague of mine, Chris Johnson, who's a physical therapist in Seattle. And he said the number one thing that he sees in clinical practice is incomplete rehabilitation by another provider. And I like that because I started seeing it in my own practice. So this guy came to me. He's actually a close friend, but he came to me and I did like 60 minutes of assessment to figure out, okay, what am I going to do differently than these other people? Not that I'm better, but I'm just going to have to look at this differently if he's tried all these traditional things that maybe get traditional results, but he wasn't just looking for traditional, he was looking for a little bit more. And I would imagine that that's the type of clientele that you see as well. Is they're not looking for typical, they're looking for a little bit more, right? Either it's more knowledge, more information, or more in terms of a clear, plan or path forward. So this guy came to me as like I'm still having some issues. So I looked at his technique, and I found this shearing mechanism to be one of his most prominent pain generators. And what was interesting to me was it wasn't strength because the dude was strong. It wasn't a strength issue. What I noticed was it was also a timing issue, his upper body moving in a different timeline. Or I shouldn't say timeline. It was just not moving in sync whenever he was doing compound movements. And what I noticed was that the shearing mechanism was more pronounced, and he elicited symptoms during deadlift, front squats, back squats, kettlebell swings. And I thought, okay, it's not that he lacks strength, it's that there's additional forces going on through the spine that are triggering these symptoms. And I used my hands to kind of be like, we've got some shearing mechanism that's going on here that you just can't tolerate at the moment. So anyways, that was kind of an example where as you were talking, I remembered this particular case, and I avoided with him for a period of time. We avoided any mechanism that induced shearing, and we just stuck to the basics. And we did a lot of other things, along the way. And then we slowly reintroduced moments or movements that did induce slight shearing and kind of like to pick the scab. I know Greg Lehman. It's like the example that he uses is to pick the scab and rather than rip the dang thing off all in one movement. So I'm kind of looking for advice from you. Like, is it acceptable to reintroduce movements later on once things have healed to try to create an adaptation with the biomechanical flaws? Or is it the type of thing where I should have said to this guy, you know what, you're done. Don't ever do this again. It's taken its toll on your body and specifically your spine. Or did I kind of, you're going to say it depends, I think, but was the advice to reintroduce stuff later on after he had been pain-free for a period of time, was that a wise, judgment call on my part?
Well, the answer has to be it depends.
Mm.
On one side of the argument, to send someone back to the program that got them into a clinical situation and pain and injury in the first place is rather stupid because you know what's going to happen. Biology, Mother Nature will ensure that the person reverts right back to the original situation. If you think you've adapted it, again, it depends. Let me tell you that say a person has a disc injury and they've lost more than, say, uh, 30%. In other words, the disc height is now 70% of what it was before. The 70% disc height loss has such profound implications on the change of the mechanics of the joint. There's far more load in the facet joints. The nucleus of the disc, when it was fully young and in good condition, it dissipated stress concentrations. That's the way the ball bearing system of a nuclear gel inside an annulus works. Things don't get stressed internally. You lose 30% of the disc height. Now it cannot dissipate stress concentrations. In other words, it's a whole different world. If you think you can go back and pick that scab, I wish you good luck. So it depends. Now, my opinion would completely change if we're building bone. So, I think of Brian Carroll. He had a massive end plate fracture, and we did a bone callousing procedure. Yes, we picked the scab. That's exactly how you rebuild bone through mechanostimulation on schedule, allowing sufficient time to in the deload between every exposure, and that's exactly how you build a bony callus. So to say go ahead and pick the scab without any further qualification, in my world, it doesn't cut it. It's very specific, and it requires a pretty good understanding of the science and what application you're going to use to pick the scab. Sometimes it will be a disaster and ensure reversion back to injury, and sometimes it's exactly the right thing to do. So, you know, eh, anyone who has a position, oh yeah, well, you just reintroduce through a graded re-exposure program. Yeah, sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes uh, no, you've got to hack your way around that. I can think of another guy who had a very storied UFC career, very good in jiu-jitsu. Well, that in jiu-jitsu, ground fighting, playing the guard, it's a lot of heavy hip flexion and spine flexion. That's what it is. So if you're going to recompete in that, I've also had, athletes compete at the Abu Dhabi Submission Fighting Championships. That's no slouch. You better be on your game if you're in there. Then they're high stakes. So with a massive disc bulge and height loss, to do picking of the scab, it's impossible to get that person back to high level jujitsu. So what we do is we don't pick the scab. We do precisely the opposite. We rest them. We very judiciously engage in mat ground fighting work. So they work on other parts of the game, stand up and whatnot, and they have a little bit of exposure to it simply to get timing down and make sure the technique's right and whatnot. And that allows them to continue training and then be at the big event to compete. So do you see how the answer is? It depends. It always is. It has to be. And it requires a little bit of knowledge and know-how. So anyway, that's
Yeah, I certainly can appreciate the idiocracy if you were to take someone from an environment that created some type of, in this particular, situation, a spinal related mechanical pain presentation. Yeah, modify it before you return them back, if at all, because that's asking for, if we don't, it's like repeating mistakes over and over again. If you don't learn from them, you're bound to repeat it. So yeah, I can appreciate that as well.
but
Because
having said that, we've got to
yeah,
get guys back to throwing 100
yeah.
miles an hour again in Major League Baseball.
Hmm.
Uh, we've had success, and I'm not saying this to boast. It's simply to demonstrate the breadth of athleticism in virtually every Olympic endeavor, every professional sport, popular non-sports. I mean, I saw a YouTube the other day of a very high-level arm wrestler. Well, they were our client a few years ago. They are back now winning the world. It's some of them you have to be ingenious on how you're going to, I mentioned Brian Carroll. It was sled dragging. It's piston squats on a belt squat machine, but he was the guy who put 1,300 pounds on his back. I might have 1,000 pound squatter. I will put 1,100 pounds on their back, 110% of their personal best, but they just feel the load. That's a neurological training session. No squats, just carry the load. As an example of hacking our way and building the system, and then, go down to 800 pounds. Now, don't pick the scab, but make things happen that need to be corrected. Okay, use your foot pressure. Your line of drive now of that 800 pounds is 1 centimeter off. 1 centimeter will either hurt or it will not give you a winning performance. Push your toe pressure down, pull the weight back. In other words, use your ankles to correct. Now, you can change the curve of your back, but that was the thing that got you into trouble last time. Now we're going
Hmm.
to stiffen the back even more and use the hips. So we're giving them strategies to not allow that flaw to happen again. Is that picking the scab?
Yeah.
No, no, we're hacking our way around it now. So, but it takes a lot of years to recognize what those mechanisms were. But as I said, I gave you examples of tendons and bones. Tendon being an Achilles tendon. It's a collagenous tissue. Go ahead and pick the scab, reintroduce it with stress, and we know from people like Jill Cook in Australia that tendon, the Achilles tendon, will most likely adapt if you've got the exposure and rest rate ratio correct. But here's the rub. The Achilles tendon, the collagen, is in line with the applied force, and there's very little cross-linking collagen in an Achilles tendon. So people will say, oh, collagen is adaptable. It is in an Achilles tendon. Now do that to a disc. A disc where the collagen fibers in one layer run 30 degrees this way, and the next layer they run 30 degrees this way. They form a fabric. You cannot apply a load to that fabric and have all of the applied stresses in line with the collagen fibers. What is stressed is the cross-linking collagen. Now, there's 7 or 8 subspecies of cross-linking collagen. God gave those to you, or actually your parents did. I hope you got the right one, because if you didn't get the right one, you will be in big trouble. You will never pick that scab, I can promise you. So, again, do you see how you got to know your stuff if you're going to say pick the scab?
Absolutely. And I think that, You mentioned neurologic adaptations, you've mentioned endocrine, you've mentioned cardiovascular, and then you also mentioned psychological. So the next question that I have for you is, of course, there's this ongoing internet debate, and there's always people for a long time have talked about the pendulum swinging from purely mechanical to purely psychosocial. So, has the pendulum swung too far in the, can't get wrong with getting strong mantra, especially when it pertains to the low back, right? Because, like you mentioned, the Achilles is very different even than Peter Mariellis's book, or not book, sorry, but his course and his work talks about the differences between lower limb tendinopathy and upper limb tendinopathy. So we can't even approach tendons with the same rehabilitative approach, let alone the spine. So if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about the pendulum of musculoskeletal, mechanical in nature versus this psychosocial explanations of back pain.
Well, I have a lot of opinions on this that I think are evidence informed. I don't see this nice little distinction between the psychological, the social, the mechanical, and I'm just going to keep going, the anatomical, the neurological, the endocrine, the cardiovascular, and whatnot, because we're dealing with a complex dynamic system. Every one of those variables affects each other. But having said that, we talked a few minutes ago about mechanostimulation. That is a mechanical force. But it's not the force that causes adaptation and influences pain. It is the derivatives from there into stress and then finally into strain. It's really strain is the trigger for adaptations. And think, as I said, even the psychological system needs stress, be it mental stress or whatever. I think of the work of Bill Maris, Professor Maris at Ohio State University. He did psychological personality profiling of workers. And then he set up an experiment in factories where those workers, uh, a fake boss would come in, or it was actually their real boss. Uh, in these different experiments, and they would stress the workers. They'd yell at them. They'd berate them. They call, and he measured the response of their body to that psychological stressor. Some of them who had, on a Myers-Briggs profiling, they had a confident personality. They didn't react physically to being yelled at and berated. The ones who had a more timid personality profile clamped up their body, substantially loading their joints. And it was just such a nice example. You can't separate the psychological from the physical. It's all one,
Mhm.
but it's modulated by variables like your personality. We know that in terms of disc herniation, the shape of the disc and the size of the disc really influences whether it's going to herniate or not, whether you will survive doing a lot of sit-ups or not. Again, all of these things this we are such a broad dynamic system, a huge spectrum with all of these phenotypes of every single variable that interact. So, I mentioned earlier, if a clinician cannot see psychological depression in the person who's sitting in front of them, they're slouched together, their knees are together, their hands are in their lap. Now, that posture is loading the posterior disc. If they have an open fissure, the disc bulge will grow. I mean, you know. Anyway, um, the next branch of science, there are people who measure psychological and social variables, and they will take groups of back pained people and people who don't have back pain, and they don't separate the pain into categories. It's just whether you have pain or not, it's binary. And they will notice that there are psychological and social features that distinguish the two. Okay, but scientists find what they look for. They never gave a chance to find out, well, what's the relative influence of mechanics, anatomy, neurology, psychology? There's very few studies that have actually done that, but every single study that has given robust measures to biomechanical variables, psychological, social, and whatnot, every single one of them has shown that the mechanical dominate. They are more important than the social. So when you think about it, you can't damage a tissue and create pain really by thinking about it. It's much easier just to break it with an overload of force. Now, once the injury or the pain or both have occurred, now psychological and social situation really matters. Let's take a social situation, which are the most difficult to deal with. We have a
Hmm.
dad who's got 6 kids and their job is demanding. They have to work and they have to keep working. But we know the physical demand of that job, together with the psychological pressures in that social rubric of having to feed 7 mouths, uh, there's the poor fella will not get better. He is exposed to what is causing his back disability every day. He's got no chance. So there's a social roadblock that until that's dealt with, no mechanics or you might get a little bit of help with mechanics and psychology, but you still the start of it is social. So that is something rather unique. But we take psychological. Let me give a psychological situation, for example, because I know there's great emphasis on, oh, well, they are well served by cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, let me give you an example of that. Let's take a person who has been told they have non-specific back pain, and worse yet, they may have been told, well, it's sort of you're thinking about it, it's in your head. And then they bend down to tie their shoe and they have an acute attack. Now they have PTSD. Can you imagine walking down a street and every time you turn the corner, you don't know whether someone's going to take a bat and hit you or not? But that's what that non-specific back pain is. It's a bogeyman that from out of nowhere come and hits them. And that's what causes their psychological distress, the PTSD, very heavy. Then I will see them and I'll say, do you know what causes these acute attacks? No. I said, but you've been to 12 clinicians. Has no one tested you and shown you these things? And they'll say, no. And I'll show them what it is. And I'll say, now, instead of just bending down and tying your shoe like that, put your hands, make them big, put your kneecap between your thumb and your hand, slide your hands down your thighs. Now shape your back. Good. Find the shape that there's no symptoms. Now lean forward as a leaning tower, push down. Now pull your hips forward to stand up. Don't lift with your back. Don't change its shape. Oh, well, that didn't cause my pain. I said, yeah, exactly. Then I'll put a kettlebell in their hands and I'll say, do it again. I didn't think this was possible. Yes, you're bulletproof. You've just mitigated the thing. So now what I did, was it a biomechanical intervention, or did I just perform cognitive behavioral therapy by reframing through the knowledge of what the pain mechanism was and empowering them with a strategy to bulletproof themselves against it? Now, was that cognitive behavioral therapy? Of course it was. Very powerful. So, yet another example of I cannot see the separation of all of these things. And people say, oh, McGill, you just do biomechanics. A, they have no clue what we do.
Hmm.
They've been internet educated. Uh, and so anyway, there's some riffing, I suppose. And so the last thing I'll say, no, I've got two things to say, thinking it through. Perform a thorough assessment of the person's pain and understand it. And if you can't find the pain, clinicians, it's your fault. Do not blame the patient.
Hmm.
It's not in their heads. It may be modulated in their heads, but you better go back again, as I used to tell my students. If you can't find their pain, you missed something, go back and reassess again or improve your assessment skills. And then teach the client what their pain triggers are and give them solutions to hack their ways around it. And there will be social aspects and psychological. But generally speaking, if you give the mechanics right, the psychological will take care of itself. Now I forgot the last little point I was going to make. But anyway, yeah, I have a few opinions about what people call the biopsychosocial, but there's a few of mine. And I would love to see the success. As I mentioned earlier, in the history of our clinic, we followed up with every single client. So I know exactly what our clinical score is, realizing that every client that we see is someone else's failure. No one comes to here and says, oh, yeah, I think I'll go to see McGill with some back pain. No, they're all 10 times failures. They've been conditioned to fail. So if we can have a 50% success rate in one subcategory, that's awesome because they were shooting zero.
Yeah.
But we know that if they fall into the category of they failed everything and they now only have surgery left, if that's their subcategory,
Hmm.
95% of them in a 2-year follow-up will have avoided surgery and are damn thankful that they have. That's a 95% success rate. So
Wow.
depending on, some heavy instabilities, we get about a 50% success rate. Someone who has motion intolerant, both flexion and extension triggers their back, we get about an 80% success rate. Again, all these people are starting at zero. So I know exactly what our success rates. Now, if someone comes with arachnoiditis, we're close to 0%.
Hmm.
We've had one or two or three maybe over my career where the adhesions have broken and they're free. But anyway, um,
Can I ask you one follow-up on that? Because you see so many people who have not had successful care elsewhere. And I have learned from you and other assessment techniques and stuff. So I do try to spend a lot of time trying to find those, the pain generator and provocation test and figure out what provokes it, right? So I try to do all of those things, and so do our listeners, right? So our listeners are locked in, and you're saying all the things that we're doing in clinical practice, so it's very validating. The one thing that I struggle or wrestle with is how do I communicate to the patient that they've actually been let down by another provider? I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but if someone else, if multiple people have attempted to diagnose and treat someone's back, a spine related condition, and they're just not successful, sometimes I have to communicate a way where they need to unlearn things about what they've been told, which I kind of have a decision to make. Do I really throw another provider under the bus in that what they're saying is not true and has really I'm thinking of one lady in particular who was told she had a pelvic shift and that was causing all of her back pain. And so she needed to get adjusted to reset the pelvis. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm seeing incredible mobility. I'm seeing great range of motion. I can move her in different positions and the pelvis changes. It's not like set in stone like this provider had communicated to her. So she came to me and she was expecting me to reset the pelvis. And I'm like, I don't know how does someone land on this? And then how do I not throw another provider under the bus? Meanwhile, I'm pretty confident I'm right in what's the pain generator. So you deal with a lot of people that have, for lack of a better word, failed trial of care. How do you respond to other providers, if at all? How do you communicate to the patient to say that they've been let down?
I
I
think
would
it
imagine you're
comes,
pretty direct.
sorry.
I would imagine you're pretty direct.
Well, let me give you my answer and then I'll ask you if that's direct or not.
Okay.
I've often, just from a philosophical perspective, I was a professor for 32 years, but I was also department chair where I had some people problems to solve and persuade people to come along with a certain direction for the department or whatnot. But anyway, my overall philosophy has always been I have to believe in people in as much as if I can give them the right information, they will make the right decision.
Hmm.
So that's a foundational starting point. When I go through the assessment that I do with clients, you can just see the lights come on in their eyes. I will say, sit on a chair, perch on the chair and sit upright. Tell me about your pain. Oh, I don't really have pain right now. Good. Okay, wonderful. I might pull their knees together and say, oh, that's my pain. And I said, but you were sitting with your knees together in your pain. Yeah, yeah, I see that. Okay. Now, I'm talking, this might be a sciatic root tension situation. Then I'll say, good. Don't move your head and neck. Drop your chest down and slouch. Does that cause your pain? No, no, not yet. And I'll say, okay. Flex your neck. Now look over. Oh, yeah, there's my pain. Yep, yep. It's on the right side. Okay. No, no, it's not there. Okay, so it's very precise. Now lift your head up. Oh, yeah, there's the pain in the middle of my back. That's it. Yep. Wow. I see now exactly what's causing my pain. Or, I might do this, pull the fascia and then the whole neural train cranially. Oh yeah, my pain's gone now. And then I'll get out a model and I'll show them, oh, you migrated the whole train this way. There was an underhook on the disc bulge that we will see later in MRI, but we already knew it was there because of the sliding of the nerves that we would have done. In other words, it's the style of the assessment that reveals to them with great precision what their pain mechanism is. And then they'll say, but my uh, previous physio just said, do deadlifts for my back pain. And I said, but you're not weak. You're plenty strong. But it's how you do it. Go back
Mhm.
to this idea and now pull your hips through. And then we'll take a kettlebell, drag it up your pants, and we'll pull a bar. Oh, well, they never told me to pull off blocks and this kind of thing. And so that's the answer to the question. And I haven't mentioned the suitability or the negligence or the ignorance of the previous clinicians that told them something that they now know in their heart is false. I don't even have to go there. They've just arrived at it.
Brilliant. I like that. Um,
Yeah, I think this is fair to say it's not in my makeup. I don't go around. I know lots of people have opinions about me. I don't think I've never, ever, I hope I never have said a bad word about any individual.
hmm.
I don't need to.
Yeah, I think I think it shows people that you're different. You don't have to tell them that you're different, and that you're looking in a different way. You don't have to put anybody down by just providing a very thorough assessment and providing that education. Um, yeah, I think that is. I might correct myself by saying I thought you would be very direct, just by saying you care, and you put someone through a good assessment, and that speaks volumes. And so you're right. You don't have to put someone down in order to lift yourself up. But that question
I,
pertained
I,
to. Go
I
ahead. Go ahead.
have
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
said to some clients, they say, oh, I'm so angry. I'm so angry at what I've been told. I've been kept a patient. In fact, I've been injured even further. I'm so angry. And I said, well, have you ever approached the clinician to say you didn't do well with their therapy? And they say, well, no. And I say, well, you didn't go back, and they may have thought that they helped you,
Hmm.
which isn't going to help the next patient that they see.
Hmm.
Why don't you go and call them? So I have said that to the patient.
Yeah, but still,
I,
it's the
I, I,
patient.
I'm
Yeah.
actually, I'm just thinking now, we had a old-time chiropractor in the town I live. I live a very small place, about 7,500 people. 2 winters ago, a client showed up on my, but by the way, no one really knows what I do in town. So I don't see local people. I don't hang out a shingle and say, I see back pain people. Every person I see flies in from somewhere in the world. So people think I'm, you know, the nut bar who's driving the snowmobile too fast down their street or something. But anyway, um, a lady showed up in a wheelchair on my front porch, pushed up there by her husband. This was in the wintertime, a couple of winters ago. And she said, "Oh, I slipped and fell on the ice. And, I'd hurt my back, but it wasn't too bad. And then I went to go see so-and-so, this old time chiro, and he manipulated me. And now I'm in real trouble." And a quick assessment showed me she'd had a fractured pelvis. And I thought, what was in that guy's mind? Would you manipulate a fracture? And so uh, she went to emergency right away. And that's exactly what she had. The next person, a couple of weeks later, was standing on my front porch, standing on crutches. And I said, well, what happened to you? Oh, I slipped on the ice. And if I showed you outside today, we've still got about 1.5 meters of snow out front. It was -12 last night. But anyway, so I said, well, what happened to you? Well, I slipped on ice and I went to go see Doc so-and-so. And she had a fractured pelvis, SI joint fracture. And so I
Hmm.
went and saw this guy and said, and he knows who I am. What are you doing? He said, well, I thought they had disc herniations. Why would you manipulate a fresh disc herniation? Why would you, and anyway, he was a bit taken aback, and I haven't seen any since. I don't know if I changed his practice. So I will go and talk to an individual. And however, I would hope I would never publicly. I don't need to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. And I think that's just being a professional, right? Like I try not to speak ill of people publicly as well. If I got a problem with you, right, or if I see something, I would do what you did, go to the person, right? And I have done that as well, where you just, the patient doesn't need to get involved in some type of, clinical beef or clinical riff, but yeah, no, I think that my question there had to do with how do we communicate to patients when they have been let down? That's because I don't want to add any salt to the wound, but I also don't want to make any necessary rival in my area. What about clinicians? So what, in your opinion, what does the next generation of clinicians need to learn? And what does maybe the more experienced, so two-part question. The first part is what do the next generation need to learn? And what does the more experienced clinician need to unlearn about low back pain in order to actually help patients in the long term?
It's another question that requires context. So I can't talk about or classify a younger clinician or an older clinician. They're all just so different. So it would be specific to an individual. But to not avoid the question totally, um, I would say there is no such thing as non-specific back pain. Please stop giving this diagnosis. Think of the current trend in modern medicine, Alex. It's all going towards precision medicine. Cancer treatments. What are the details of the cancer? What's the person's phenotype? What's their predisposition to a certain chemo part? What is the radiology? dose that goes along with that chemo and that person's phenotype and their particular subcategory of cancer. You get what I mean? Very precise.
Yeah.
So to have nonspecific back pain no longer cuts it. A thorough assessment avoids this and creates a very specific understanding of the person's pain pathway, be it in the full biopsychosocial mode, since we were just talking about that, come up with a strategy to mitigate the cause, build a foundation for pain-free fundamental movements. Can the person walk? Can they sit? Can they use footwork to turn, drop step, walk? Uh, can they manage a lift, a child from the floor, carrying groceries, bilateral carry, and then understand what their goals are in life. And it may be an honest conversation as to if they are really realistic goals. You get the guy who comes in, he's a 50-year-old warrior. He says, well, I want to play golf. I want to get back to my gym weightlifting, and I want to run, and the guy has three disc bulges, high instability. And I say, Mother Nature uh, will not allow that from a mathematical probability point of view. You're going to have to work with Mother Nature. Choose one and now start organizing the adaptation and tuning of your body to meet the demands of more load bearing if you want to weight train. Golf, you're going to have to back off on the weight training because we need to strategically tune the mobility stability rubric throughout your linkage. We'll probably have to send you to the Jimmy Ballard School of Golf Swing down in Florida, or whatever it is required. So we'll tune that a little bit. But anyway, uh, that would be my answer. Those clinicians who perform a technique, and they're good at it, and they do that with every single back pain patient, I know what their score is going to be. They'll do quite well with a few. They'll completely fail with a few others. The cure or the solution is to get a few more tools and skills in the toolbox. Do the assessment and pull out the right tool for the job. So I don't know if that's a young clinician or an old clinician, but if I can say this, it then becomes a wonderful career. Uh, it's a journey and a path to mastery that it never ends. I'm on the path. One of these days I'll be a master. And that's the fun of it. It's the journey. So that would be the last part to answering such a thing as to what someone needs to learn and unlearn, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think as long as we're open to feedback, as long as we are constantly, um, a metaphor would this be is like, you're trying to learn and learning takes growing pains and learning takes effort. It's like riding a bike up a hill. You don't learn more typically by coasting, and you can only coast going downhill. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of people have good intentions and they want to help their patients. And so they're the type of people that are listening to this podcast. Let's put it that way. They're the lifelong learners, the seminar junkies, the people like me that have heard you speak multiple times. And every time I hear you speak, I just get one different nugget, one different gem that I can take away. And it makes the flight, the time away from family, the hotel, the seminar cost, whatever it is, worth it for that one gem that we can hear from people like you. And so yeah, I really I think I speak for a lot of people that say like what hope do we have? Like you're on the path to try to become a master, and we're looking up to people like you. And but at the same time, we also have an internal drive to continue to pursue excellence in the clinical realm. And so those are the type of people that listen to this podcast. So that was a great answer. That was a great answer, if I'm being honest.
Most of the younger fellas, and when I say fellas, I mean, and most of the younger people, shall we say, I guess
Yeah.
these days I have to qualify that. But they may or may not realize this, but if they are 28 years of age, they're a hell of a lot further down the pathway than I was at 28. I can guarantee that. So maybe that gives perspective to help them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I've one last question for you, which is impromptu, because, and feel free, you do not have to answer, you don't have to give your perspective on it, but as we're talking about and how many facts and how much detail you know about the spine, as a scientist and as a researcher yourself, I'm curious to your thoughts on the more that you learn about the spine. Do you believe that there's a creator who created this, or do you believe in like an evolutionary standpoint? Because it almost, well, I'll just stop there with my question. Do you believe that there was a designer with all of the details that you've learned about from the spine?
I was fine until that last sentence with all I've learned about in
Okay.
spine. Can I shift that to what I've learned in life?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
okay. I don't know, Alex, but these are the things that I think about. Could I create a better body for what it is we need to do? There was a TV show a number of years ago where they put together a group of experts, a knee person to, if you had a chance to redesign the knee, how would you do it? We have all these knee injuries, etc. I was the spine guy. So if you got to design the spine again, and I went through, well, a ball and socket won't work. You need a disc that adds bending stiffness. Otherwise, I'd be so inefficient. I'd have to have a huge amount of muscle controlling all these oranges that are stacked one on top of the other that are ready to fall at any minute. The disc gives that definition of
Yeah.
stiffness that allows us to be efficient with minimum muscle and minimum brain power. So I can move around and I would put a ball and socket joint either end of that flexible rod and a hinge joint at the knee and elbow. It's all perfect. It
Mm.
can't be improved upon. So whoever designed us, or whether it was that we evolved, did it perfectly.
Mm.
Now, um, what were we designed by God? Were we implanted here by some extraterrestrial event that none of us are aware of? Now I have to take my mind to our genetic code, which we've learned so much about in the last, I'll say, 20 years really with the Genome Project, but say 15 or even 10. Our bodies are digitized. It's a code. And I've heard some people argue that we're living in a simulation and all this sort of thing. And as a scientist, um, and I know Elon Musk talks about this, you cannot rule out the impossibility of it, given that we are a heavily codified digital. We're the product of an algorithm.
Yeah.
So, how did that come together, the code, from this accidental collection in a little primordial biological soup that was hit by some form of energy, a bolt of lightning or whatever, turn into this fantastic codified structure? And when I look at evolution and the transition of species, I wish I saw right now more transitions of species. Why is the cardinal, the blue jay, the in other words, where's the half cardinal, half blue jay? Where are it is such a division of species and so these are things that make some of these things from either a purely scientific perspective, meaning no creator,
Mm,
versus there is a creator, uh, it's impossible to rule out either one or probably a combination of the processes. So then logic would then take us further up the tree and what is the divine? And then we start getting into the universe and the creation. And, you listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson and people who make that complexity somewhat understandable and consumable. So I can't answer that question, but I can certainly tell you that I don't believe entirely in one or the other. It's all possible. It's one of the great mysteries. We'll never know.
mm,
But it's what I call a beer and peanuts discussion. Those are the
mm,
things that bring us together, not separate us.
mm.
They should bring us together with over a glass of beer or wine or a hot tea or whatever. Have a few
Right.
peanuts and discuss it. And then when we're all done, we're going to go out and have a fish or a run or whatever it is we're going to do. And then it doesn't get any better than that. So there you go.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for entertaining the question and giving such a thoughtful answer and
Well, I'm
wholehearted
curious
answer. Yeah.
now. I have a
Yeah.
feeling I know where that question came from. So what are you thinking?
Well, I've talked to a lot of orthopedic surgeons, and I've talked to a lot of I would say a lot of I know a handful of either brain surgeons or neurologists who deal with complex. There's a pediatric neurologist here in town. I've talked to him several times, and the orthopedic surgeons they think they are the god. They think they are gods. Like they come in, they fix things, and I'm overgeneralizing orthopedic surgeons. There's a lot of really good ones, and then the ones who are intimately aware of the brain and the complete nervous system, the ones that I've had these conversations with, and I've asked them that same question, they almost don't hesitate. They say the more that they learn about the brain, the nervous system, and about the human body, it points towards a creator. And I find that fascinating. I am a believer myself, and I believe in creation. I believe that we were created by God in His image. And so your comment about even the spine being like perfectly made. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about being before you were even born, you were knitted together in your mother's womb. And I just think that someone like you who has studied the spine for so long, I was really just curious, like, how has that either strengthened your faith, questioned your faith, brought you closer to religion, or and there's no wrong answer. I think everyone's on a journey. I just look at it from a standpoint of I think it deepens my faith to know that someone like you could not make the spine better, right? I think it points to a creator, and it gets me excited to think about something that is beyond my understanding, that I have no control over, and that has created this body. And mine's a little bit wavy with my scoliosis, a little bit wavy, but it's still made in the image of God, which that gives me hope, a hope which, like I said, passes the understanding of man and into the divine. So I don't, does that answer your question? I didn't mean to give you a sermon and preach at you, but I appreciate you asking me.
Yeah, well, it's a good conversation.
It is. I like that you had a beer and peanuts conversation. The last either statement or question that I have for you before we wrap up and I'll let you get on your way is if you are ever a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast, okay? If you're ever a guest, he for whatever reason never misses a chance to put down chiropractors. But I think it's because he's used to, or the ones that he has seen that he had a bad experience with. I think he needs a guest chiropractor on the show, or he needs to talk to somebody about maybe he had a bad experience. But maybe if you get on his show one day, could you advocate for chiropractors for me?
What's a chiropractor?
Oh, what's a chiropractor? Someone that uses their hands to diagnose and treat muscle. That's the technical definition, but I would just say someone that helps people.
When you look at BackFitPro, uh, our our website, we have clinicians on there that I've trained in the things that I've talked about today, a very thorough assessment skill set, and then a very thorough treatment skill set matched to what the assessment showed. Go look at the credentials of the clinicians who are on there, who I pick. Uh, I don't know if this is true, either the majority of them, more than half, or certainly a large proportion of them will have their original start in chiropractic. And when you look at the training, I know there's great differences in chiropractic training, but generally speaking, there's an appreciation for the differentiation of mechanics of a person. There's an understanding of what causes movement, stress distributions, and all these sorts of things. So it's a good place to start with. If the student of chiropractic graduates and manipulates in a 10-minute or less visit, and they see and brag about how many patients they see in the day, I really don't have much empathy for that. But all those chiropractors that I just mentioned to you on our website, they have a very developed skill set and assessment and a very deep toolbox. In fact, I would say the majority of them, most of the time, would not manipulate a person. I hope they put their hands on them to assess them. You
Right.
have to feel activation and where the stresses are in the body and that kind of thing. So you need good hands. But anyway, their hands have been trained. We do an exercise here when we're training them. I pull a mustache hair out of my little bush here and I put it under the page, and I have a phone book over here. You can see there's a little bit of a lecture room over there with a table at the front. There's an old phone book there. If it's a bit of an antique, and then I hide the mustache hair in the phone book, and they have to find the hair under one page, two page, three page, four pages, etc., so that they can feel individual motor units activate in a muscle. That's one of the purposes that we're going through when we're feeling muscles activate. So I asked you, what's a chiropractor? It's someone who has that training for sure. But when it gets to practice, I couldn't define what a chiropractor is. It's
Mm.
it's a spine doc, I hope. Whether they manipulate or not, to me, doesn't define so many of our clinicians who have a chiropractic shingle outside their clinic. So that's why I asked that question. So now you're asking me to advocate to Joe Rogan for a highly non-homogeneous thing. So do you see Stu McGill, who needs a little bit of precision, would say, I'd like you to advocate for good spine clinicians who have
Yeah.
this full skill set, and some of them are chiro. Do you see how that would
Yeah.
go?
I appreciate the answer that and the expansion on the profession there too, because you're right. I think getting a DC degree is a great start, right? And Cairo school teaches us how not to hurt people, but then it's the wild, wild west when it comes to how we actually implement treatment in the clinical setting. Um,
Let
and
me
so,
play a game and say, well, can I advocate to Joe Rogan to really promote professors with labs and scientists? Because there are some horrible ones and there are some fabulous
yeah,
ones.
yeah.
And there are some ones who, just draw attention to themselves by being very just bad actors, shall we say, poor manners, crass, on social media to get attention to themselves. And there are others who are, wonderful. uh,
Mm,
people to learn from and have discussion. I mean, I couldn't advocate for, uh, I can't think of a profession that I could advocate for. All I can do is advocate for good people. And,
mm,
if you want to go back to a religious foundation, uh, do they live by the golden rule? Do they treat
mm.
others the way they wish to be treated themselves? I mean, it doesn't get any more fundamental or better than that. And try and tell the truth and um, help where you can. I mean, these are all biblical concepts, and that, that's it.
I agree. I think that is a great place to wrap up. That is a great place. Thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day and your schedule and your setup there. And yeah, just thank you for the answers. Thank you for the conversation. What a gift. This was a gift for me. And I've said, I think every time I interview someone that for purely selfish reasons, I enjoy interviewing people because I get to learn as well. And so thank you. I really appreciate you've done a tremendous job for not just our profession, but a lot of healthcare and strength professionals all over the world. So thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate your time.
Okay, well, thanks for your leadership and all of this grand effort as well, Alex. Thanks so much.